What's the smartest revenge you've ever heard of? My new neighbor knocked on my door 2 weeks after she moved in and demanded I tear out my flower garden because the bees were terrorizing her family and her daughter could be allergic. I looked at her and said, I've had that garden for 12 years and the bees have never bothered anyone. And she turned around and walked away without another word. A week later, I found an official-looking notice taped to my door citing me for a noise violation and demanding I remove my wind chimes within 14 days or face daily fines. I almost threw it away because it seemed ridiculous, but it had a case number and a city seal and a signature at the bottom, and I couldn't afford to gamble on fines I might not be able to pay. I took down the wind chimes. 2 weeks after that, another notice arrived claiming my bird feeder was attracting rodents and creating a public health hazard. And this time, I actually picked up the phone to call the number listed before I chickened out and decided it wasn't worth the fight. The bird feeder came down the next morning, and for the next 2 weeks I watched the cardinals and finches who had been coming to my yard for years fly to the spot where it used to hang and circle there confused before giving up and flying away. A month later, a citation showed up about my compost bin violating sanitation codes, and I stood in my backyard looking at this thing I had built with my own hands and wanted to scream. But the notice looked so official, and I was so tired of fighting, so I spent a whole weekend hauling it to the dump. Every time I looked out my window, my backyard felt emptier. Then a notice arrived that stopped me cold. It stated that my cat was a documented threat to local bird populations, and I had 30 days to rehome him or surrender him to animal control. My cat was 15 years old and had never set foot outside in his entire life, and this notice claimed he was a threat to birds. I didn't hesitate this time. I called the city directly, not the number on the notice, and the woman who answered searched every database she had access to. No noise complaints, no citations about bird feeders or compost bins, no case numbers matching anything they had ever issued, no ordinances about cats threatening birds. She said, "Ma'am, there is absolutely no record of any complaints against your address." I hung up and my hands were shaking. My wind chimes were in a landfill, my bird feeder was in a dumpster, and I had hauled my compost bin to the dump with my own 2 hands because this woman printed some fake letterhead and I was too scared to push back. She had stolen pieces of my life one by one, and now she had tried to take my cat. I sat there until my hands stopped shaking and my heartbeat slowed down, and by the time I stood up, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I spent the next 3 days researching local ordinances and learned that backyard beekeeping was completely legal in our area with no permit required and no restrictions on how close hives could be to a property line. I drove to a beekeeping supply store 3 towns over and spent $400. 3 hives went up along the property line the following weekend, and within a month I had hundreds of bees who loved my garden and loved the smell of anything sweet drifting over from next door. I was sitting on my porch sipping iced tea when my neighbor's daughter's birthday party started in their backyard, and I watched families arrive carrying presents and dropping kids off in their swimsuits. The caterers set up a long table full of cupcakes and cookies, and a massive 3-tier pink cake that must have cost a fortune, and someone filled a glass dispenser with fresh lemonade. I counted at least 30 people back there, and the noise of kids splashing in the pool and parents laughing drifted over the fence. My bees discovered the party about 20 minutes in. The first few landed on the frosting, and the caterer tried to wave them away with a napkin, and then a dozen more arrived, and then suddenly there were so many, the cake looked like it was vibrating and humming. A little girl started screaming and ran straight into the pool without even checking if anyone was in her way. A dad knocked over the entire lemonade dispenser trying to swat them away from his face, and glass shattered across the patio. Cupcakes went flying as someone grabbed the tablecloth and tried to cover the food, but that just made it worse because now the bees were trapped and angry. A woman in a sundress ran past with a bee tangled in her hair, slapping at her own head and shrieking. Kids were crying and parents were grabbing them and running for the house, and my neighbor came sprinting across the yard toward my fence with her face twisted up in rage. She screamed, "You did this on purpose and I am calling the police right now." Her daughter ran up behind her crying and tugging at her arm and said, "Mom, why